Good morning, everyone. We are going to go ahead and get started on the online courses accessibility, the last in the five-part series that Dr. Zaira Jordan, the Web Accessibility Coordinator for Iowa State, has presented for us. So there are a bunch of links in the chat box, some of the resources that Zaira is going to talk about today. And of course, if you have any questions throughout the presentation, go ahead and post those in the chat box and we will get to them. So Zaira?
Good morning. I'm really excited and happy to be here in the fifth webinar on this series. Today, we're going to talk about accessibility specifically in online courses. And I think we have a very interesting session prepared. And I would like to hear a lot about your specific use cases. What do you come across that you might think needs a little bit more of accessibility addressing in your online courses tasks. So let's get right in. And our outline for today is first we're going to kind of define what is an online course. And then we're going to go over some tips to make your online course accessible. The third item talks about Moodle specifically because it is my understanding that most of you might work in using Moodle to put content for online courses together, and then measures specifically for online course content in Moodle. So I wanted to start by defining what is an online course because sometimes when instructors teach online, they think of it as basically something parallel or very analogous to what they do in a classroom, and it's very different. The online teaching learning experience needs to take into account that you're interacting with the student who has a lot of contextual issues that might make it a little bit more challenging for them to pay attention to your content. So it needs to be real well planned and laid out, the content, so that the learner has a satisfying, not only satisfying but efficient experience throughout the course content. So one of the most important recommendations that has come out of research is that you should align in your planning objectives, activities, assessments, and outcomes, as you see here. So when you're laying out and planning your course content, you first define what are your objectives. What is it that you want to accomplish by sorry laying out this course content? What at the end of the course, what do you want your learner to have learned? What do you want the lessons to be? That's the first thing that you should think about, objectives. For instance, when I'm thinking about putting together a content on digital accessibility, I think about my different types of learners, their roles, what do they do in their daily lives, and how is the content that I am going to put together for them relevant to their own experiences. And then I lay out the objectives. With that those same thoughts in mind, I think about what's going to be the outcomes and how am I going to assess their knowledge if I need to assess it. So you may come across content that you're putting together and you don't really necessarily need to assess after they have completed the course. But it is good to have some sort of interaction and activity so that your learner expresses and I guess works throughout the content that they have been exposed to so that they can, the activities help them analyze and get into the deep processes that help them, I guess, synthesize the knowledge that they have acquired. And that also deals with your organization. And in a minute, I'm going to show you a graphic that conveys that a lot more effectively, I feel. Um, the online learner tends to be, like I said, different from the students or learners that might attend the classroom. As I said, they have a lot of contextual factors. It might be, a mother with 5 kids, like I used to be, that is at home and has a lot of noise around her, and she wants to be able to listen to the content at night. If the content is in audio, it might be, an adult learner that has a place of work and, takes his lunch off so that he or she can go through the content. So think about all those possible learners when you're putting your content together. So that's general. That's not necessarily only accessibility. It's just good practice in terms of online course content. And how is it that online teaching it's very different from what you do when you're in a classroom. I have actually done both. So I speak from my own experience, and I have had good and bad experiences both in the classroom and online, and I have learned from those. So let's go right ahead and talk specifically about the tips to make your online course accessible. And I should honor some of my sources. Yes, the first source that you're gonna find in your chat, it's a link to the Center for Excellence in Learning and Teaching at Iowa State. They are the gurus in teaching. They are those who inform, guide, offer training and guidance in general to Iowa State's faculty. They offer a lot of training, and they have put together specific content about accessibility in online course content, as you see here. Um, they have 10 tips for creating accessible course content. I have kind of synthesized and curated their content. If we go back to the presentation, I'm sorry. I just wanted you to have that link in case you want to go more in depth. So moving ahead in the next slide. As you see here, one of the tips, it's be consistent. And this is not only for online course content, it's for any content that you're putting together for a learner. If you kind of draw an experience that is consistent in terms of how it works, how the learner goes through the content and the experience, it's kind of it follows a pattern throughout the whole course, then it helps the learner understand what does he or she need to do in order for he or she to complete the content and be successful at completing the course. So as you see here, this graphic shows the content broken down by modules, which is best practice. So let's say that, for instance, at Iowa State, we work with semesters. I think it's 16 weeks semesters. So we usually have one module per week. Sometimes that best practice can be modeled to your content. For instance, if it's that we have content that it's a little bit more dense, you might want to divide it into 2 or 3 modules, even if it's not necessarily, it doesn't really obey a week pattern. But still, if you have a module per content item that it's kind of like something that is going to take a week, for instance, in this case, then you have a lecture that if it's online might be video. It might be that you want to put together a PowerPoint and have an audio file attached to it. You might want to annotate your slides by inserting audio, and that would need also a transcript as well. If you put together a video, you are going to need to include captions, and then some assignments so that the learner verifies what he or she has learned. And then you might want to have a quiz, or depending on what kind of tasks the content lends itself to, you can devise different ways of interacting with the learner. So, and then have it be basically linear in terms of module 1 takes you to module 2 and module 3 and so on and so forth. The second tip or recommendation I kind of have on my own, and it's drawn out of the tips that CELT offers, but it's also from my own experience, and it stems from recommendations from, as you see here, the National Center on Universal Design for Learning. Universal design is it's an framework that guides designing specifically. I mean, it was born in architecture, so it was born as an effort to make all physical spaces accessible to everybody, including persons with disabilities. In the learning context, it's based off of studies in neurosciences, and these studies have found that we, I guess, learn differently. So there's as many learning styles as there are people, and they have identified three areas of our brain, basically, that are associated with representation, as you see here, or the what of learning. How do you put together the content? So it's good to have not only, let's say, a video, but also have a transcript and an audio, have different modes of presenting your content so that your learners, somebody might prefer to read, some other learner might prefer to watch a video, different types of representations, see a graphic instead. I am a visual learner myself, so I like things presented in a graphical way. I like to read, and sometimes I'd rather read out of a paper than read out of the computer. So I print out whatever notes I want to read through. So things like that have to be kept in mind. Then the second item is provide multiple means of action and expression, the how of learning. So how do you engage your student? If you create a discussion board, it's an interactive activity, whereas if you have a quiz, it's more of an isolated individual experience. You can create multiple means of action and expression so that your learners, you basically cater to their different needs in terms of how they learn. And then finally, you can provide multiple means of engagement, the why of learning. And we can go back to the browser to show the. Do you have?
So one good, like you've seen our content editor training Moodle
Uh-huh.
course, right, Zaira?
Mhm.
Okay, so like we have the step-by-step instructions written out with um, screenshots depicting the instructions,
Mhm.
and then we have videos available, and we have resources included if you want to test out what we're trying to teach.
Mhm.
And then we have printed out instructions that you can also do too on each individual lesson.
Mhm.
So,
Excellent. That's a great example. So you may be looking at now at the browser, and I have and that this link is provided in the chat box. It's the UDL Center, the National Center on Universal Design for Learning.
the second link in the chat box.
Okay, and they provide, as you see here, lots of information about what Universal Design for Learning is, what's the basis for it. They even have a book that you can download. So, for instance, let's go to the quick link. What is UDL? And what I was talking about, it's based off of neurosciences. And the graphic here, I have a copy of it in my presentation. It shows how different areas of the brain are involved in different processes in terms of our learning processing. And let me see the three principles, the ones that I was just discussing. So you can go more in depth throughout this website if you'd like. It's really very, I mean, it's based off of neuroscience research. So I see it reflected in my own experience as an instructor. We're going back to the presentation. Okay, so the next slide, it's the graphic that I just talked about. Our brains process new knowledge differently, and we have those recognition networks that are related to the what of learning, how we gather facts, how we view the content differently. For instance, what I call a non-visual user resorts to the audio most likely. So they might have to, whatever content you have to convey, you have to be very thorough and very aware that you're conveying it through audio. The how of learning, how do you perform your tasks, how do you engage with that content, and then the affective networks. Every human being has a background, and we have their emotional aspects of self that help us navigate our experiences, even our learning experiences. So there are those aspects of learning as well that are very relevant to any learner's experience. And then our next slide talks about other tips to make your course accessible. One of the things that is talked about in the CELT tips, but also that I have experienced myself, is that you should offer frequent and quality feedback. As soon as you have some sort of an activity where your learner is going to report on what they have learned, try to provide feedback that is timely and in depth as much as possible. Then there's one another strategy or tool that you might resort to. It's called a plus delta. And it's basically two questions at some point in your course where you might want to ask your learner, what do you like about the content? How does it help? And then what needs change at this point? It helps you basically assess your content in a way that it's more interactive, and you might be able to adapt it and adopt new measurements, or try to convey the message in different ways so that your learner has a better experience and they in fact learn. It's a very great tool that I have used myself in my courses, and it helps me a lot. It helps me adapt to what they need. And then the last one here in this slide is include an accessibility statement. And I'm going to show you a sample of what we do at Iowa State. It's a recommended accessibility statement. In other words, disability accommodations, but you might want to word it differently. And it is good to have it in any content that you present.
And this is the third link in the chat box.
And you can I don't know if you have one in extension.
We have a policy page that all of the websites that we have, the footers linked to the exact same policy page, and we do have a paragraph in there related to accessibility and
Okay.
digital accessibility.
Okay, good. So this one here is the one that should appear in every syllabus and in every online course that we have at Iowa State. And as you see here, it talks about our commitment as an institution to ensuring that all our students are not discriminated against, and we offer services through the Student Disability Resources Office for accommodation specifically. So
so this would not be entirely specific to our extension outreach courses, since the majority of our courses, if not all of them, are for either staff or outside participants.
Okay. So the one thing that you can do in that sense is that, just by being mindful and applying these strategies and thinking about different ways of representing and engaging your learner, you're doing a lot. You're making it a lot more accessible than it would be if you don't think about those things. You're always presumably are going to have some sort of an accommodation. So it's good for you to provide a link to a contact person, an email, or a form that reports on if there's a need for someone to be accommodated.
Yeah, I think you just make the policy link on Moodle in general, or we do the justice statement for extension and outreach has contact information for accommodation requests and issues. So I think just including the justice statement might cover most of that.
Okay. And we want to go back to the presentation then. And finally, I think this is the last slide on tips. At Iowa State, we have instructional developers that are specialists on designing course content for online teaching. So I don't know if your designers can resort to these kind of resources. Do you provide extension provide some support in that sense?
Yeah, professional development does quite a bit of training and classes offered. And then EIT has our Moodle person, and they help get the content up and make sure everything is organized and done well.
That's excellent. Use that support because these are the experts, and you are wanting to convey a message. You're wanting to your learner to understand your content, and it's a complicated job to get done. So use your support. Then I'm guiding you back to what we talked about a couple webinars ago, and the link appears here. Follow accessibility recommendations for number one, structure. It goes back to having everything organized and being consistent. So plan your coursework so that you are consistent in the way that your learner experiences it. That includes, for instance, if you have a document, have headings and subheadings that guide your learner through the content in an organized way, I should say. Include alternate text for images. Whenever you insert an image, go right ahead. My recommendation would be don't wait. Go right ahead as soon as you insert an image. Think about what description you want to insert in your image and make it contextual. Make it short, but make it so that it responds to the need of the learner in that context. That is, if you're showing an image that is seeking to convey a meaning to your visual user, have your description be the same meaning for the non-visual user. In terms of the color, in the session before, we talked about how it needs to be high contrast between the background and the foreground. And we have a few tools that we advised about back then.
Yeah, and Moodle is set up with specific color options.
Okay.
So some of that is already taken into account.
Excellent.
Yeah, but I'm sure there is avenues for people to be more creative, and it's just a caution to watch that creativity.
Yeah. And then the links should be self-explanatory. That is, for instance, you see that URL that I provided for you connecting to the extension recording. In the case that you're watching this and you need to possibly copy that link, that's suitable. I mean, that's effective. But you see the other link that says quality matters in this slide. The links, for the most part, should appear like that. That link that is provided through the quality matters link that you are seeing in the slide, it talks for itself.
So linking to text as opposed to just pasting the link.
Exactly. Yeah. And then in terms of multimedia, if you have a video, have it have captions. That's very important for those learners that might not be able to listen to your content, be it because they have an auditory impairment or because they're in a place where there's a lot of noise and they're watching your video in a smartphone. Mm-hmm. That's what I'm doing more lately. So I can totally relate. As I said, there's that link, the URL for the recording that you might want to watch some other time. It's a recording with the webinar more in depth about all these different topics: structure, alternate text, color, links, and multimedia.
And when I send out a recording of this particular webinar, I'll include a link to the previous webinars as well.
Okay, excellent. And then finally, I have here follow quality matters standards. Quality matters, and if we may go to the link, it should be the fourth link in your window. And then as you see in the webpage for Quality Matters, they are an organization that was born out of of a grant funded by the Department of Education. They have put together a number of rubrics, in total 8 rubrics. The eighth rubric is about accessibility specifically, but their standards are excellent in terms of how to convey online content for learners. I don't know if you have a membership. Iowa State does have a membership. It's a paid for service, so I don't know if it is even necessary, but briefly, um, let's see
No,
about.
if Iowa State has one, we might possibly
We
also
can,
have access to that.
yeah, we can inquire more about that. CELT might provide more information about quality matters, but as you see here, they have a lot of experience and they are a well accepted and very reputable standard in higher education about how to put content together. And some of the recommendations they have been kind of inserted in my own recommendations because I have gone through their training. So the point is that if you're putting together a content that it's going to be high impact, it might be, good to look into having it be certified through Quality Matters. I would go back to the presentation. Any questions about any of those things so far?
If anyone has any questions, feel free to type those in the chat box at any time.
Okay, let's talk about Moodle specifically because that's your learning management system. At Iowa State, we have another one. We just got a new
Canvas,
one. Yeah. So, sorry, I have a little bit of experience with Moodle, so I'm gonna talk a little bit using that experience, of course. And I did a little bit of research of the most recent, developments in terms of Moodle. They have what we call a VPAT. A VPAT is called it stands for Voluntary Product Accessibility Template. It's a document that is it's not a requirement, but it's a recommendation from born out of the requirements from the Rehabilitation Act. And many organizations, products, services have this documentation so that basically they state where are they at in their accessibility efforts. So I have a link to that VPAD. I don't know. Oh yeah, we're gonna go into it. We have to go back and forth. I'm sorry about that. But I just wanted to share all these good resources. So as you see here, remote learner might be
The second to the last link in the chat box is where this is located.
So as you see here, the link, it links to the VPAT, to their own specific VPAT. And the VPAT includes all the different sections in the law, in the 508 requirements that apply to online content. And as you see here, it's some of the things, for instance, let's go into supports with exceptions here. When software is designed to run on a system that has a keyboard, product functions shall be executable from a keyboard. That talks about keyboard accessibility because some users do not use a mouse, so they operate the software through a keyboard. In case of Moodle, it seems like they don't really support this totally, completely. So that's one thing that they might be working on. It says here Moodle 3.0 Plus utilizes the ATTO toolbar for HTML editing. This toolbar is highly accessible via keyboard shortcuts.
So it sounds like the editor within Moodle is accessible.
So I don't want to go that much in depth. It's just so that you know that there's this documentation, and whenever you come across a product, a software product that has some interface where we're going to have some user interact with it, they should have this documentation. So every software everything that you put together online, it's a work in progress in terms of accessibility because your content gets updated. So you're going to have to keep thinking about accessibility as you update your content. In the case of Moodle, we see that they might have some things that they're still working on. And one of the things that I would recommend is, as you see here, if you're very involved in putting together content, online content, course content in Moodle, I would recommend you join this accessibility collaboration group because it's a good resource to have in terms of the information and updates they might offer through their collaboration. And there's a link to that. I'm not going to go into it, but you have we can provide it later. Oh, they have it.
It's the last link in the chat box.
Okay, great. And then I would recommend that if you come across something, a bug in Moodle itself, you report it, be it to extension or to Moodle themselves. I would recommend. Do you have any contacts, any way to contact Moodle directly? As you go through your course content, and if you find something that it's not accessible as you'd like it to be, I would recommend that you look for a resource in Moodle themselves and report it to them because they should take that into account as they release new versions. That's what they do. I mean, I'm working with Instructure, the Canvas company, and they are very accessible, but accessibility is never 100%. It's, like I said, a work in progress. So what we have, my approach to it has been to establish partnerships with the companies, with the vendors, so that they are informed, and we partner in developing a software that is more accessible. You can't control Moodle,
Yeah, I think
the framework.
yep, we've talked about this a lot, I think, with social media. If anyone was listening in on the social media presentation that Jed Finley did as part of this series, or video presentation, I guess, but he did talk about videos on different social media channels, and there's just not a lot of accessibility happening in a lot of the major social media, and you just have to work within, do what you can. Like Twitter, you can add image alt text and stuff like that to images. So just working within what you have, what they have available, doing what you can. Yeah, that's all we can do.
Exactly. And these accessibility considerations, I think companies are growing more and more aware of the need for having that in mind as they update their products and services, because they're not only good for persons with disabilities, they're good for everybody. They're good more and more for our mobile users who might be looking at content in a smartphone, which seems to be more, a growing audience. So if you don't appeal to those, you're going to lose a large segment of your public, of your user base, I guess. So moving on to the next one, and I have measures for online course content in Moodle with a question mark, because I wanted to ask you, Christy, and maybe the members, those of you who are listening to us today, what things that do you come across when you're putting your content specifically in Moodle? As I went through the sample course that Christy provided for me to look at, I see that it's very navigable through a keyboard. There's a lot of links to resources outside of the platform itself. So, we've talked before about how to make Word documents accessible if you're linking to a Word document, how to make PDFs accessible if you're linking to a PDF, how to make, videos accessible. So that's external content.
Which still counts, right?
Definitely.
Yeah. Even if it's not content you're specifically putting in your course, that you're just linking to, whether you own it or not, we still have to make sure that what we're providing as a resource is accessible as well.
Definitely.
So obviously, if it's not something you own, or someone within Iowa State or Extension Outreach owns, it's a little bit more difficult.
Yeah.
So we have to make the decision about whether we really need to include it or whether we can contact them to ask for an accessible version.
Yes, and I have come across cases where, for instance, we have faculty members that resort to YouTube videos to drive their message across. And there are many videos that have excellent captions. So why not, search for those rather than inserting a video that might have automatic captions that are not accurate.
Right.
Those are not effective. I mean, it's better.
It's just like going back to the first few slides when you were talking about, planning out and really having a organized plan for your course. And that's just another thing to start adding to your workflow when you're thinking about how to design this course and lay it out is thinking about accessible resources as well and looking for those instead of it's another consideration basically.
Your images, again, if you're going to insert images in your course content, think about how you want to describe them when you insert them so that you have that alternate text already planned for and you don't have to, like do a spur of the moment kind of description, which might not be as effective.
Yep.
We don't have any questions?
Any questions at all?
I'm going to advance so that you guys can get my information. I would encourage you to follow my Twitter feed. This is the most updated resource for me. I come across a lot of articles, and I use Twitter to keep track of those. So.
Yeah, and I think throughout the university we have quite a few different avenues that you can go to look for accessibility for different platforms and softwares. And so obviously a couple of the links that Zaira shared would be helpful, although they're not specific to Moodle, but they are specific to online learning. Digitalaccess.iostate.edu on this slide is Zaira's website, and she likes to share a lot of things that you can do it yourself, and some different free things out there that help you get to the accessible point and explanations and tips and stuff. And then we have a page on Extension IT's website under I'm trying to remember, but it's under tutorials. There's a digital accessibility link there that kind of links out to some of the different resources that we found or that we have to help with accessibility as well.
One other thing that I didn't add into the presentation is that we have started a meetup. So I know that your learners or your listeners or your participants here might be all over the state, but we're going to try to have it be scheduled throughout at least the central Iowa area. So hopefully we're going to have some meetings in Des Moines and maybe in some other towns. So look it up. I don't know if we can provide the link right now, but it's Central Iowa Digital Accessibility Meetup at meetup.com.
I'll try to get that here while we're waiting to see if anyone has questions.
Also, if you go to my website, the www.digitalaccess.iostate.edu, you're going to get the news about our trainings. We're holding one on tomorrow, and you might not be able to come, and I haven't really recorded any of those, but I do periodical refreshers and new trainings, so you can get informed about those at the website.
Yep. So I went ahead and put up the link to the meetup. It's a in-person. The first one is next Wednesday evening, and completely around accessibility. So if you are available or want to come, please join us. Yeah. Okay, if there are no questions, I think we'll go ahead and end the webinar. Thank you guys so much for joining us. We will have the recorded version available within the next couple days, maybe beginning of next week, and I'll get that emailed out with the links to the other webinars in this series as well. So thank you, Zaira.
Thank you.